Now, I'm pretty sure if you clicked on this video, you have a lot of questions, and why I film in my attic might be one of them, but I'm not going to be answering that today. We're here to talk about what is Formula One, and how you as a beginner might be able to start to understand it. Also, this is where I keep my F1 models. Look, it's the F2002. Isn't that nice? Supposing you have a relative who's going on about this thing called Formula One, and for the longest time, you've had no understanding about what it even is, and you have completely no idea what Netflix's Drive to Survive is. So here, I got you covered, and without any questionable and completely made up commentary along the way. What Formula One is the pinnacle of single-seater racing. Sure, you've got yourself the likes of touring car and German DTM, you've got American NASCAR and IndyCar. Formula One, if you want to look at cars where you're just the one driving, it's pretty much the top. There are 10 teams involved with 20 drivers, so that's 2 drivers per team. I could talk about past years where you may have had upwards of 12 teams or even like 16 teams, and then you have to pre-qualify in which to qualify. That's a little bit complicated and not entirely relevant to this story. The 10 teams presently are Red Bull Racing, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes, Alpine, McLaren, Haas, Alfa Romeo, Williams, and AlphaTauri. Ferrari is the oldest team on the grid, dating back to 1950 when Formula One was first created. And the newest team is Haas, which arrived in 2016. Alfa Romeo technically came in 2019, but that's down to naming rights and not themselves being an actual team. They're actually run by Sauber Engineering, and it gets a little bit complicated, but you don't have to worry about that. Do you have to pick a favorite team right out of the gate? Well, no, not really. I would watch a few races to get a general idea about what you like and gravitate towards a team or a driver that you have a particular affinity with. My favorite team is McLaren, and I started to get on board with them properly when Fernando Alonso joined them in 2015. And Fernando Alonso is the driver that I'm currently having a big affinity with. I fell in love with his antics in 2012 when he drove the Ferrari car, which wasn't particularly good that year, to places where it really shouldn't have been. And he's basically doing the same at Aston Martin this year, so you can pretty much get an idea about what I experienced over a decade ago. But as for your favorite driver and team, that's up to you. Who is the current champion? Well, it's Max Verstappen in terms of the Drivers' Championship, and Red Bull for the Constructors. And before that, Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton were the dominating force and hope to be back up there sometime this year. Let's get on to what happens during an actual race weekend. If you've got friends that watch Formula One, most likely you've never been able to actually socialize with them because they're busy the entire weekend. Now, you can be antisocial too, because throughout an entire weekend, 3 days, teams get upwards of 2 to 3 hours worth of practice. Although some rule finagling might actually reduce that, such as sprint qualifying and sprint shootouts, but that's a little bit more complex for what you need to know right now. Drivers get 3 practice sessions of 60 minutes each to try and understand what the circuit is like, for teams to understand what technical gremlins they might have, and actually install some upgrades they might have, because the cars do evolve over the course of a season. What the car starts off as at the beginning of the year is not where it ends up. Then on the Saturday, you have a 1-hour session called qualifying, which determines the lineup for the grid on Sunday. And sometimes the spread between first and last can be as little as a second. So whenever you hear a team having an upgrade which reduces 2/10 off a particular lap time, that's a big deal in Formula One. That's like a blink in an eye, see? I'm faster than you. Qualifying is broken into 3 chunks called Q1, Q2, and Q3. Each last a particular amount of time. Q1 18 minutes, Q2 15 minutes, and Q3 12 minutes. In Q1 and Q2, 5 drivers are eliminated, and only 10 drivers go into Q3 to decide the top 10 of the grid. So it's a simple elimination process. Over the years, qualifying has evolved in Formula One, and during 2005, you had aggregate qualifying, which combined 2 lap times together in some kind of averaging out. It's complicated. Then 2016, you had like elimination qualifying, which works for like a game like Wipeout, but not Formula One. It's very hard to keep track of. Now, in terms of actually getting a car on the actual track, you need something called tyres. Now, I'm pretty sure you know what a tyre is, but in terms of Formula One tyres, it's a little bit more complicated. You might hear about compounds like C1, C2, C3, or even C0. You don't really need to know about that when you're watching your first race. You'll hear something called soft, medium, and hard. The red, yellow, and white compound tyres. It's got a little band around the edge. The soft tyre goes fast, but doesn't last all that long. The hard is a long boy, but isn't all that quick, and the medium set is a balance of speed and duration. So you can use a combination of the 3 compounds to try and get the ultimate strategy for your actual race. But if you think you can just use the same type of tyre throughout the entire race because you particularly like it, you can't do that. You actually have to have one guaranteed pit stop where you change your compound. Unless it's wet, of course, where it's completely open season. So you can pretty much do whatever you want, including running a medium tyre in the rain if you're very, very brave or very, very silly. The race itself lasts for about 90 minutes or so, or 300 kilometers in length, or if you're American, it's about under 200 miles. Each track has a different amount of laps depending on how long the track is, as low as 44 laps at the likes of Spa-Francorchamps, and at Monte Carlo, where it's very, very short, you can have upwards of 78 laps. But whatever the number of laps, if you're in the top 10 at the end of the race, you score points, starting at 25 first and down to 1 point for 10th. If you are 11th to 20th, then you don't get a single solitary point. And here's another little bonus thing. If you're in the top 10 and you get the fastest lap of the race, you get an extra point. So it's a nice little bonus as well. But if you're in the bottom 10 and you get the fastest lap, then no points for you, my friend. And if you think fastest laps are just a gimmick or something like that, no, because it can actually ultimately make or break your championship. Max Verstappen likes to collect fastest laps, even when he doesn't have to. Typically, the F1 circus starts in Bahrain in March and ends in Abu Dhabi in November. There's usually about 22 or 23 races, and in the not too distant future, it could be 25 races per season. But it is, of course, very, very taxing for the particular staff members involved, so you gotta respect them. So I think 20 races is the ideal amount. Here's a list of abbreviations and terms that you might actually hear over the weekend. First is the big one, DRS, the drag reduction system. There's a little flap on the rear wing of the car that opens up and can increase its top speed on long straights, or in specific areas of the track. It's good for overtaking, so whenever you hear the commentator saying, oh, they're using the DRS, then that means they are using that to facilitate an overtake on the front straight, or on a back straight, or wherever there is a DRS zone. And it also can help them go faster on straights during qualifying. And if you ever hear a thing called the DRS train, that means there are multiple drivers who are also using the DRS at the same time, so nobody gets an overall benefit, and that is a bit of a downside to this technique. It all started in 2010 when McLaren introduced something called an F-duct. It was a nice little thing where the driver can either press a button or hold their hand over a particular duct and then actually eliminate drag on the rear wing, making their car go faster. The FIA caught on to this, and in 2011, they standardized it in the form of DRS. Nobody really talked about that, the 2010 F-duct, the F being where the McLaren sponsor Vodafone actually was situated. Then there's the undercut, overcut, rumbling free. The undercut happens when a driver goes into the pits earlier than the driver that they are battling with, be they ahead, behind, or whatever. It's all about strategy, you see. Then the overcut is the opposite. So instead of going earlier, the driver waits a little longer. Maybe their tyres don't need to be changed yet, or they want to wait it out before they can actually change tyres. Can they refuel during a pit stop or the race? No. What they start the race with is what they've got. So sometimes you hear somebody coasting during a race, which means that they have to actually reduce the amount of fuel they're actually using to try and actually last the race. Then Formula One has a collection of flags. Some other types of racing also have their own collection of flags, and their definitions are kind of similar. The red flag basically means that the race has stopped, and everyone has to get back to the pits, and then they go from there. The yellow flag occurs when there's something dangerous on the track and requires a driver to actually slow down. And if you get two of them at once, you have to be prepared to stop because there's something going on, like something's been strewn onto the racetrack, or there's a stuck car that marshals have to actually go and collect. And then the blue flag, which you really don't want to see, is when people say that you are slower than the driver behind you, get out of the way. If you ignore it 3 times, then you get a penalty. And we'll talk about penalties later. If there is a car stuck on the track and it cannot be retrieved, then a safety car or a virtual safety car can be called out. The safety car bunches the field together and travels slowly around the track to give recovery crews more time to remove debris and repair damaged bits and do it more safely. Virtual one's kind of the same thing, but it applies to the entire track, and it's less disruptive than a safety car. Think in NASCAR or in IndyCar, a full course yellow. It's pretty much the same thing, really, just a different term. Now we'll talk about those penalties. The most likely penalties that you hear will be 5-second penalties that are given out for little transgressions or accidents on the track. Sometimes it can even double up to be a 10-second penalty or a drive-through penalty. You actually have to drive through the pit lane, which can be as upwards of 20 seconds of a delay. So you don't want to get a drive-through penalty, and you certainly don't want to get a stop-go penalty, which means you have to drive into your pit garage, stay there for 10 seconds, and then go again. That can pretty much ruin your race altogether. Just like how that helicopter ruined my recording. Then there's something you might recognize from your driver's license, penalty points. Drivers can accrue up to 12 penalty points in the license before they actually get 1 race ban. Pierre Gasly got very close to this, but they do expire after a period of time, so thankfully we will not be seeing Pierre Gasly getting a racing ban. Wish I gave you a race ban, helicopter! Now I could talk about things like the engines, or the MGU-Ks, or the MGU-Hs, or the ERS, but that's a little bit complex for what you need to know right now. But they're basically things that are involved in making the car go fast and stuff like that, but it's not important for this beginner's video. Well, that should be enough to get you started in Formula One. I hope this has actually been of interest to you, and if you'd like to have any more questions answered, leave a comment below. I'll see you down there.